September 9th, 1939. The Polish army retreats to the southeast as German and Soviet forces advance. 5 a.m. German operations on the Western Front. German armored divisions under the command of General von Rundstedt and General Guderian continue their advance toward Lwów and Brest, while the German army maintains full use of Blitzkrieg tactics to crush the remaining Polish forces. After the capture and devastation of Warsaw and Krakow, German units push forward with the goal of securing complete control over Polish territory. German strength in this phase includes approximately 250,000 soldiers, around 600 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, and nearly 2,000 aircraft, ensuring total air superiority. After the systematic destruction of infrastructure in Warsaw, Lwów, and Brest, German command prepares for the final encirclement of the remaining Polish formations. Supply columns move continuously behind the advancing divisions to maintain the tempo of the offensive without interruption. 9 a.m. The Polish army continues its retreat to the southeast. After the destruction of western Poland and the encirclement of Warsaw following days of relentless bombardment, the Polish army continues withdrawing toward Lwów and Brest. Polish forces are heavily exhausted but still attempt to maintain some form of organized defense. Polish strength in the Lwów and Brest region is reduced to roughly 50,000 soldiers, most of them demoralized and lacking adequate supplies. Only around 15 tanks remain operational, all of them badly damaged from earlier engagements. German motorized and armored divisions tighten their encirclement from all directions, preparing to completely seal off Lwów and Brest. 1 p.m. German losses during the advance on Lwów and Brest. Despite constant ground fighting and repeated air attacks by the Luftwaffe, German losses during the advance remain limited, though sporadic resistance continues along the front lines. German casualties during operations around Lwów and Brest reach approximately 1,500 soldiers killed or wounded. Around 30 German tanks are damaged, mainly during clashes with remnants of Polish defensive units. As Polish positions collapse one after another, German forces press forward and complete the encirclement of Polish units in and around Lwów. 4 p.m. Soviet forces advance into eastern Poland and occupy Brest-Litovsk. In accordance with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Soviet Union intensifies its invasion of eastern Poland. Soviet forces under the command of General Timoshenko enter Brest-Litovsk and advance toward Lwów. Soviet strength in the Brest-Litovsk and Lwów region includes approximately 500,000 soldiers, around 300 BT-7 and T-26 tanks, and roughly 1,000 aircraft conducting frequent air raids against Polish positions. Soviet units gradually move westward as Polish forces, already severely weakened, struggle to avoid complete destruction while attempting to withdraw. 6 p.m. The Polish army continues its withdrawal into Romania. Facing annihilation from both west and east, the Polish army continues withdrawing its remaining units into Romania, where plans are made to organize resistance from exile. Around 30,000 Polish soldiers manage to move toward Romanian territory, while approximately 15,000 form the core of the emerging Polish exile army. With Polish defenses collapsing on both fronts, the Polish government formally decides to abandon the homeland and continue the struggle from abroad. 9 p.m. German forces complete the encirclement of Lwów and Brest. German forces under General von Rundstedt complete the encirclement of the remaining Polish units in Lwów and Brest. Around 100,000 German soldiers surround the city of Lwów, supported by approximately 500 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks positioned for the final destruction of Polish resistance. The last organized Polish defensive positions are isolated and cut off from escape or resupply. Summary of September 9th, 1939. September 9th marks the day on which the Polish army faces near total encirclement and begins its final withdrawal into Romania. Following the devastating advances of Germany and the Soviet Union, Polish forces enter a critical phase as Lwów and Brest stand as the final defensive points. With Soviet troops pushing into eastern Poland under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Polish army finds itself trapped between two invading powers. As civilians are evacuated and Polish military strength dwindles, the Polish government begins organizing resistance from Romania, marking the transition of the conflict into exile. September 10th, 1939, final encirclement as the Polish army retreats. 5 a.m., German advance toward Lwów and Brest. German panzer divisions continue their offensive toward Lwów and Brest, aiming to complete the encirclement of the remaining Polish forces. Under the command of General von Rundstedt and General Guderian, German units push into the Lwów region and prepare for the final assault. German strength in this phase includes approximately 250,000 soldiers surrounding Lwów and Brest, around 600 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks advancing into the region, and about 1,500 Luftwaffe aircraft maintaining air superiority and conducting constant strikes on Polish defensive positions. Despite desperation and heavy losses, Polish defenders in Lwów and Brest struggle to hold their lines under continuous bombardment. 9 a.m., the Polish army retreats toward the southeast. The Polish army continues withdrawing toward the southeast, moving the last remaining units into Romania to ensure survival and reorganization within the emerging exile forces. Offensive operations are no longer possible, and Polish command shifts fully toward evacuation and strategic withdrawal. Around 30,000 Polish soldiers move toward Romania, accompanied by roughly 15 tanks that are now nearly non-operational. Polish military leadership formally decides to continue resistance abroad, with hopes of reorganizing in Romania and negotiating military assistance with the United States, Great Britain, and France. 1 p.m., German forces advance toward Warsaw. German armies begin their movement toward Warsaw, where the final remnants of Polish defense still resist. With Lwów encircled, tank divisions under General von Rundstedt advance toward the capital, initiating the definitive siege of Warsaw. German strength during this phase includes roughly 150,000 soldiers participating in the siege and around 400 Panzer IV tanks supported by motorized infantry. As Polish defenses collapse city by city, German units concentrate on tightening the noose around Warsaw, leaving the remaining Polish forces increasingly at the mercy of the invading army. 4 p.m., German casualties. During the encirclement of Lwów and Brest, German losses during the day remain relatively low due to the near collapse of Polish defensive capabilities. Polish forces attempt last-ditch defensive actions using artillery and scattered infantry formations, but encirclement cuts off their ability to mount effective resistance. German casualties amount to around 1,000 soldiers during the ongoing siege, and approximately 25 tanks are damaged, mostly due to isolated defensive efforts by Polish infantry units. German motorized divisions finish surrounding the final Polish defensive pockets, preparing for the capture of the last organized Polish formations. 6 p.m., civilian casualties and the Polish population's response. As German and Soviet forces continue advancing, civilians in Lwów, Brest, and Warsaw endure constant bombardment and ground attacks. Civilian casualties in Lwów and Brest range between 5,000 and 6,000 people. Between 10,000 and 15,000 civilians attempt to flee toward Romania and other safer territories. With Warsaw destroyed and other major cities under siege or captured, mass evacuations occur throughout western and southern Poland, while Luftwaffe aircraft repeatedly strike retreating columns of refugees. 9 p.m. The Polish army withdraws into Romania. End of official resistance. After 9 days of intense combat and the crushing advance of both Germany and the Soviet Union, the Polish army formally decides to surrender organized resistance on Polish soil and continues its withdrawal into Romania. Around 20,000 Polish soldiers manage to reach Romanian territory, while about 10,000 form the core of the Polish exile army. The Polish government relocates to Romania, beginning negotiations with Western allies for military support and assistance in continuing the struggle for Polish independence. Summary of September 10th, 1939. September 10th marks the day when the Polish army faces complete military collapse. After the destruction of defenses on the Western Front and the Soviet invasion on the Eastern Front, Polish forces decide to retreat into Romania in hopes of rebuilding resistance abroad. German and Soviet forces secure full control over most of Poland, with Warsaw under German siege and the remaining regions falling rapidly under German and Soviet occupation. Civilian casualties rise sharply, and the Polish government transitions into exile while seeking military aid from the United States, Great Britain, and France. September 11th, 1939. Final destruction of Polish defenses as Poland surrenders. 5 a.m., German advance toward Lwów and Brest. After desperate attempts by the Polish army to resist on the Western Front, German panzer divisions continue their advance toward Lwów and Brest, where the last organized Polish defensive positions remain. German strength in the area includes approximately 250,000 soldiers operating around Lwów and Brest, supported by around 500 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks leading the assault on Polish defensive lines. About 1,500 Luftwaffe aircraft continue conducting relentless air raids on Polish positions. German armored columns under General Guderian rapidly push through Lwów and surrounding key towns, while exhausted Polish forces attempt to organize a final resistance. After heavy losses, their ability to withstand the German advance steadily collapses. 9 a.m., the Polish army prepares for a final withdrawal. After days of continuous bombardment and failed defensive efforts, the Polish army makes the decision to begin a definitive withdrawal toward the southwest. Plans are set to move all remaining forces into Romania and continue the fight from exile. Polish forces can no longer withstand the combined pressure of German armored divisions and the advancing Soviet army from the east. Around 30,000 Polish soldiers remain in the Lwów and Brest area, attempting to organize a final defensive stand, supported by only about 10 tanks, most of which are destroyed or non-operational. 1 p.m. The Soviet invasion continues. Following the German invasion of Western Poland, the Soviet Union continues its advance into Eastern Poland. Soviet forces under the command of General Semyon Timoshenko move into Lwów, securing eastern Polish territories in accordance with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Soviet strength includes approximately 500,000 soldiers, around 200 BT-7 and T-26 tanks, and roughly 1,000 aircraft. Soviet units rapidly occupy Lwów and Brest-Litovsk, while Polish forces in the east lack the means for effective resistance. Polish units are surrounded, detained, and disarmed across these regions. 4 p.m., German losses during the siege of Lwów and Brest. Despite constant ground fighting and Luftwaffe bombardments, German losses during the advance on Lwów and Brest remain relatively low, as Polish forces are already critically weakened and near collapse. German casualties amount to roughly 1,000 soldiers during the siege operations, while approximately 50 Panzer IV tanks sustained damage during close engagements with remaining Polish infantry units. German motorized and armored formations continue tightening the encirclement around Lwów and Brest, eliminating the last organized Polish resistance. 6 p.m., the Polish army withdraws into Romania. Under relentless pressure from both Germany and the Soviet Union, the Polish army begins moving its final remaining units into Romania to continue resistance from exile. This decisive step marks the loss of most Polish territory, but preserves the core of future resistance. Around 25,000 Polish soldiers managed to cross into Romania, forming the basis of an exile force numbering approximately 15,000 soldiers prepared to continue the struggle against Nazi Germany and Soviet occupation. 9 p.m., civilian casualties in Lwów and Brest. Luftwaffe airstrikes and ground operations continue to devastate civilian populations in Lwów and Brest. Civilians attempting to flee toward Romania and neighboring regions face constant air raids and ground attacks. Civilian casualties in Lwów and Brest are estimated between 7,000 and 9,000 people, while between 15,000 and 20,000 civilians attempt to escape into Romania and surrounding territories under extreme danger. Summary of September 11th, 1939. September 11th marks the day of complete encirclement of Polish forces by both Germany and the Soviet Union. German units press forward in Lwów and Brest as Polish forces commit to evacuation and exile. Civilian casualties increase dramatically, while surviving Polish troops continue withdrawal into Romania. Although Poland stands on the brink of total defeat, this day also marks the beginning of organized Polish resistance from exile against Nazi aggression and Soviet occupation. September 12th, 1939, the final withdrawal of the Polish army as German and Soviet forces secure control. 5 a.m., German operations on the Western Front. German units, including armored divisions, continue advancing through Lwów and Brest, securing full control over these regions. After days of siege operations, Germany moves to eliminate the last remaining Polish forces still operating in these areas. German strength includes approximately 250,000 soldiers, supported by around 600 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks. Nearly 2,000 Luftwaffe aircraft continue conducting sustained air operations against remaining Polish positions. Following continuous aerial bombardment and the rapid advance of tanks and motorized infantry, Polish forces abandon organized resistance and prepare to withdraw. 9 a.m. The Polish army withdraws toward the southeast. After the final encirclements at Lwów and Brest, the Polish army begins a full withdrawal toward Romania in an effort to reorganize abroad. The last Polish units retreat under constant pressure while planning to continue resistance through exile formations. Around 20,000 Polish soldiers managed to cross into Romania, supported by only 5 operational tanks, most of which are barely functional. With the destruction of Poland's remaining defensive capabilities, the surrender of the country becomes unavoidable as the Polish government prepares to continue resistance from exile against both Germany and the Soviet Union. 1 p.m. The Soviet invasion of eastern Poland continues. In accordance with the secret clauses of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Soviet forces continue their invasion of eastern Poland, occupying additional cities across Belarus and Ukraine. Soviet formations under General Timoshenko consolidate control over Brest-Litovsk and advance toward Lwów. Soviet strength consists of roughly 500,000 soldiers, supported by approximately 250 T-26 and BT-7 tanks and around 1,500 aircraft. Soviet authorities begin establishing administrative control over eastern Polish territories, which are gradually integrated into the Soviet Union, signaling the irreversible loss of Polish sovereignty. 4 p.m. German losses and civilian reaction. German losses during operations around Lwów and Brest remain minimal, as the Polish army no longer possesses the capacity for coordinated defense. With Polish military resistance effectively destroyed, German forces finalize control over key strategic locations. German casualties amount to approximately 1,000 soldiers, while around 30 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks sustain damage during operations. As German troops continue advancing toward Warsaw, Polish civilians flee en masse from cities under German and Soviet control, seeking safety beyond the collapsing front lines. 6 p.m. Civilian casualties in Lwów and Brest. Following sustained German and Soviet air raids on Lwów and Brest, civilian losses continue to rise sharply. Constant bombardment and ground combat devastate urban areas, leaving thousands dead or wounded. Civilian casualties in Lwów and Brest are estimated between 6,000 and 8,000 people. The Polish government, in exile in Romania, initiates large-scale evacuation efforts, while tens of thousands of civilians attempt to escape into neighboring countries amid worsening humanitarian conditions. 9 p.m. The Polish government in exile and reorganization of resistance. The Polish government operating from exile in Romania begins diplomatic efforts to secure international support and reorganize armed resistance against German and Soviet occupation. This day marks a defining moment in Polish history, as the nation transitions from territorial defense to resistance abroad. Approximately 10,000 Polish soldiers form the nucleus of an exile army, while between 20,000 and 25,000 civilians continue crossing into Romania. Summary of September 12th, 1939. September 12th marks the definitive collapse of organized Polish resistance inside Poland. Following the destruction of Western defenses and the Soviet invasion from the east, the Polish army withdraws into Romania to continue the struggle from exile. German and Soviet forces secure full control over Polish territory, placing the nation under complete occupation. Civilian casualties continue to mount, while the Polish government commits itself to sustained resistance against both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union from abroad. September 13th, 1939, final encirclement as the Polish army withdraws into Romania. 5 a.m., German operations on the Western Front. German armored divisions, supported by motorized infantry and artillery, continue advancing eastward, encircling the last Polish positions at Lwów and Brest-Litovsk. After days of relentless bombing and ground assaults, the Polish army reaches a critical breaking point, with its ability to resist virtually exhausted. German strength in the region consists of approximately 250,000 soldiers supported by around 600 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks. About 1,500 Luftwaffe aircraft continue conducting repeated air raids against remaining Polish defensive positions. Following the capture of Warsaw and the destruction of organized Polish forces in the west, German panzer and motorized formations shift fully toward Lwów and Brest to seal the final encirclement of the last Polish units. 9 a.m., the Polish army continues its withdrawal to the southeast, with most Polish forces in the west destroyed. The Polish army initiates a full withdrawal toward Romania, seeking to continue resistance from abroad. Remaining Polish units move under extreme pressure as western regions fall completely under German and Soviet control. Approximately 25,000 Polish soldiers succeed in moving toward Romania, accompanied by only 10 tanks, most of which are heavily damaged from previous fighting. Roughly 2,000 artillery pieces remain, but lack sufficient ammunition to provide effective defense. Following the withdrawal into Romania, the Polish government commits itself to organizing resistance abroad and begins seeking military support from the United States, Britain, and France. 1 p.m., the Soviet invasion continues in the east. In accordance with the secret protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Soviet forces expand their occupation of eastern Poland. Already in control of Brest-Litovsk and Lwów, Soviet units advance deeper into eastern Polish territory and begin establishing administrative control. Soviet strength includes approximately 500,000 soldiers, supported by around 250 BT-7 and T-26 tanks and roughly 1,000 aircraft conducting repeated air operations. Polish forces in the east are no longer capable of organized resistance as Soviet control rapidly expands. 4 p.m., German losses during the encirclement of Lwów and Brest. German losses during operations around Lwów and Brest remain limited, as Polish units effectively cease active resistance. With Polish defenses dismantled, German forces establish firm control over western and southern Poland. German casualties amount to approximately 1,000 soldiers, while around 30 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks sustain damage during combat operations. German motorized and armored divisions continue repositioning their forces, maintaining constant pressure throughout the region. 6 p.m., civilian casualties in Lwów and Brest. Following continued German and Soviet bombing and ground assaults, civilians in Lwów and Brest face ongoing devastation and mass displacement. Civilian deaths caused by bombardment and ground fighting in these areas are estimated between 7,000 and 9,000 people. Between 15,000 and 20,000 civilians attempt to flee the combat zones, seeking refuge in Romania or other areas not yet fully occupied. Polish civilians remain trapped between two advancing forces, facing attacks from both directions. 9 p.m., the Polish government in exile. The Polish government finalizes the transfer of its administration to Romania, initiating diplomatic negotiations with Britain and France for military assistance. With the destruction of Warsaw and Krakow and the Soviet invasion from the east, Poland is effectively divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Approximately 20,000 Polish soldiers form the emerging core of the exile forces, while between 15,000 and 20,000 civilians continue crossing into Romania. The Polish government commits to continuing the fight from abroad, ensuring that Poland remains part of the wider struggle against German and Soviet domination. Summary of September 13th, 1939. September 13th marks the definitive withdrawal of the Polish army from most of its territory. German and Soviet forces consolidate control across Poland, while the Polish government relocates to Romania to continue resistance from exile. Civilian casualties continue to rise, and growing numbers of Polish soldiers and civilians enter exile as Poland becomes fully divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. September 14th, 1939, the Polish army withdraws as Germany and the Soviet Union secure full control. 5 a.m., German operations on the Western Front. After desperate defensive efforts around Lwów and Brest, the German army, under the command of General von Rundstedt, continues its advance eastward to destroy the remaining Polish forces and occupy the last unclaimed territories of Poland. Following the capture of Warsaw, Krakow, and Brest, Germany moves decisively toward complete control of the country. German strength consists of approximately 250,000 soldiers, supported by about 500 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks. Around 1,500 Luftwaffe aircraft remain active, conducting sustained bombing operations and maintaining air superiority. German units push deeper into eastern Poland, where organized Polish resistance has nearly ceased and remaining forces are severely depleted. 9 a.m., the Polish army continues its withdrawal to the southeast. The remaining elements of the Polish army, now critically weakened, continue withdrawing toward Romania, where resistance will be reorganized from exile against Germany and the Soviet Union. This day marks a definitive stage in the Polish retreat. Approximately 15,000 Polish soldiers move toward Romania, accompanied by only 5 tanks, the last remnants of Poland's mechanized forces, most of them barely operational. Several thousand artillery pieces remain, but are rendered ineffective due to destroyed supply lines and lack of ammunition. Upon crossing into Romania, the Polish military command begins reorganizing its remaining forces and seeking support from Britain and France. 1 p.m., the Soviet invasion continues in eastern Poland. Following the consolidation of control in western Poland, the Soviet army continues its occupation of eastern Polish territories, with Brest-Litovsk and Lwów fully under Soviet control. Soviet strength in the region includes approximately 500,000 soldiers, supported by around 300 T-26 and BT-7 tanks and roughly 1,000 aircraft. Soviet forces occupy additional areas across eastern Poland, while Polish military units on the Eastern Front cease organized resistance and continue retreating toward Romania. At this stage, it becomes clear that Poland is no longer capable of mounting effective resistance against the dual invasion by Germany and the Soviet Union. 4 p.m., German losses. During operations around Lwów and Brest, following repeated ground assaults and aerial bombardments, German losses during the advance on Lwów and Brest remain relatively low, as the Polish army is exhausted and incapable of coordinated defense. German casualties amount to approximately 1,000 soldiers, while around 30 tanks, mainly Panzer II and Panzer III models, sustain damage during engagements with remaining Polish positions. German units secure full control over key cities including Kraków, Katowice, Warsaw, Lwów, and Brest, and prepare for further consolidation toward eastern Poland and the Romanian frontier. 6 p.m. Civilian casualties in Lwów and Brest. After several days of continuous bombardment and ground fighting, civilian casualties in the regions of Lwów and Brest continue to rise. Civilians attempt to flee towards safer areas, but evacuation routes remain under constant aerial attack. Civilian deaths in Lwów and Brest are estimated between 5,000 and 7,000 people killed by Luftwaffe raids and ground operations. Large groups of civilians move toward Romania in an effort to escape further violence from both German and Soviet forces. 9 p.m. The Polish government in exile in Romania. Following the devastating advance of German and Soviet forces, the Polish government completes the transfer of its administration to Romania, where it begins organizing resistance against both Nazi and Soviet occupation. This moment represents the definitive end of Polish independence inside the country, but also the beginning of a new phase of resistance from exile. Approximately 20,000 Polish soldiers form the nucleus of the exile army, while between 20,000 and 30,000 civilians cross into Romania. The Polish government begins diplomatic negotiations with the United States, Britain, and France, seeking military assistance to continue the fight against German and Soviet aggression. Summary of September 14th, 1939. September 14th marks the complete withdrawal of the Polish army into Romania and the full consolidation of control over Poland by Germany and the Soviet Union. The Polish government relocates to Romania to continue resistance from exile, while Poland itself falls under joint Nazi and Soviet occupation. Civilian casualties continue to climb in Lwów and Brest, and with the destruction of the Polish army and major cities, the nation enters a dark period of foreign domination and underground resistance. September 15th, 1939, the Polish army in exile as Germany and the Soviet Union consolidate control. 5 a.m., German advance toward the east. German panzer divisions continue their advance through Lwów, Brest, and other cities that are already under full German control. After the rapid conquest of western Poland, the German army now shifts its focus to the eastern regions administered by the Soviet Union. German forces finalize the encirclement of the remaining Polish defensive positions. The German army fields roughly 300,000 soldiers, supported by about 600 Panzer IV and Panzer III tanks. The Luftwaffe deploys around 1,500 aircraft, conducting continuous bombardment of Polish positions. With the Polish army destroyed in the west, Germany concentrates on securing total control over all Polish territories while preparing for potential movement toward Romania and the still unoccupied zones of Poland. 9 a.m. The Polish army in exile. The Polish army continues withdrawing into Romania, where it intends to organize resistance against both Germany and the Soviet Union. This marks the final strategic decision for Poland's remaining forces, which face total destruction on the Western Front. Approximately 25,000 Polish soldiers cross into Romania, and around 20,000 form the new exile army. With most Polish forces crushed by Germany and the Soviet Union, the Polish government relocates to Romania to continue directing resistance from abroad. A new phase of the Polish struggle begins, the war carried on from exile. 1 p.m., the Soviet invasion in eastern Poland. The Soviet army under General Timoshenko continues its advance deep into eastern Poland, moving toward Lwów. Soviet strength increases to nearly 500,000 soldiers with around 250 BT-7 and T-26 tanks and about 1,000 aircraft. Their objective is the occupation of all remaining Polish territories not yet under German control. As the Soviets expand their hold on eastern Poland, they begin establishing administrative structures over the captured regions. 4 p.m., German losses around Lwów and Brest. Despite heavy Luftwaffe attacks and persistent ground operations, German losses remain low because the Polish army no longer possesses the strength to mount organized resistance. German casualties reach approximately 1,500 soldiers, while around 30 Panzer IV and Panzer III tanks are damaged. German and Soviet forces continue advancing, and all Polish defensive positions have collapsed. 6 p.m., civilian casualties in Lwów and Brest. Civilians in Lwów and Brest suffer increasing casualties as bombardments and ground assaults continue. Many attempt to flee the fighting, but face danger from both advancing German and Soviet forces. Civilian deaths number between 6,000 and 8,000. Between 15,000 and 20,000 civilians attempt to escape toward Romania. 9 p.m., the Polish government in exile and plans for resistance. With Western Poland destroyed and Soviet control expanding in the east, the Polish government in exile begins planning international resistance efforts. Negotiations begin with the United States, Britain, and France for military assistance. The exile army numbers around 15,000 soldiers, while 20,000 to 25,000 civilians continue fleeing into Romania. The government prepares for long-term resistance abroad and seeks support from Western allies. Summary of September 15, 1939. September 15th marks the definitive withdrawal of the Polish army into Romania. German and Soviet forces secure complete control of Polish territory. With the destruction of national defense, the Polish government in exile commits to organizing continued resistance against both occupiers. Civilian casualties in Lwów and Brest continue to rise, and Poland enters a period of dual occupation under Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. September 16, 1939. Poland under occupation as German and Soviet operations continue. 5 a.m. German and Soviet operations in the West and East German Panzer divisions under Generals von Rundstedt and Guderian continue advancing into eastern Poland, closing in on the last fragments of Polish defensive positions. The Soviet army under General Timoshenko secures eastern Poland and begins organizing administration and control over regions such as Lwów and Brest-Litovsk. Germany fields roughly 300,000 soldiers supported by about 600 Panzer IV and Panzer III tanks. The Soviet Union deploys around 500,000 soldiers who already control the eastern half of the country. With both invading powers advancing successfully, the remaining Polish units are scattered and pushed southward, attempting to regroup through Romania. 9 a.m. The Polish army retreats into Romania. After the destruction of Warsaw, Krakow, and Lwów, the Polish army commits to withdrawing into Romania to reorganize under the authority of the Polish government in exile. With devastating losses and depleted supplies, the Polish army can no longer mount an effective defense. Around 20,000 Polish soldiers retreat into Romania, with only a handful of tanks remaining operational. Artillery units are few and nearly out of ammunition. Once in Romania, the Polish government in exile begins diplomatic efforts to seek military assistance from Britain, France, and the United States while planning resistance abroad. 1 p.m., German consolidation in the east. German forces continue securing newly captured areas. Following the encirclement and destruction of Polish forces in the west, German divisions now push deeper into eastern territories. Approximately 150,000 German soldiers and about 300 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks advanced toward Lwów to secure full occupation. After numerous air raids and ground assaults, Germany establishes control over all strategic cities in the region. 4 p.m., German losses around Lwów and Brest. German losses remain relatively low due to the Polish army's collapse and inability to resist. Casualties amount to roughly 1,000 German soldiers, while around 30 Panzer tanks are damaged during the final engagements near Lwów and Brest. German motorized infantry and armored divisions eliminate the last remaining Polish defensive positions. 6 p.m., civilian casualties and civilian flight, Luftwaffe air raids, and Soviet-German ground operations cause heavy civilian casualties throughout Lwów, Brest, and Warsaw. Between 7,000 and 9,000 civilians are killed. Around 15,000 to 20,000 civilians attempt to flee toward Romania and nearby regions, hoping to escape air raids and advancing ground forces. Many face direct danger from bombing and chaos along evacuation routes. 9 p.m., the Polish government in exile begins organizing resistance. The Polish government in exile relocates fully to Romania, where it begins forming long-term resistance strategies against Germany and the Soviet Union. Appeals are sent to Britain, France, and the United States for military cooperation and support in rebuilding the Polish armed forces abroad. The exile army reaches roughly 25,000 soldiers, while 20,000 to 25,000 civilians continue fleeing into Romania. Summary of September 16th, 1939. September 16th marks the complete withdrawal of organized Polish military forces as Germany and the Soviet Union secure absolute control over the country. With catastrophic losses in the collapse of national defenses, the Polish government shifts to foreign soil to continue the struggle from exile. Civilian casualties rise sharply, and Poland becomes fully partitioned between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Despite defeat on home soil, the foundations of Polish resistance abroad begin to take shape.